Today, I want to talk about the troubling and harmful myth that feminists promote regarding what they term as toxic masculinity, which they claim is behind virtually every ill in modern society. First, it is part of an overall feminist strategy that starts with the assumption that men and women are equal and women can do everything that men can do, and then creates exceptions to this equality where women are better than men. Most importantly, that women can have babies and women are more sociable and less violent. To then come to the preordained conclusion that men are inferior to women and offer nothing of value, so that their elimination would be best for the welfare and survival of the human race. By the way, the obvious response to that is that there is no reason to believe that women can do everything that men can do, as there is no evidence in history supporting that conclusion. Obviously, women can't do the evil that men can do, but just as obviously, they can't do the good that men can do. Mostly men are found at the extremes in intelligence, creativity, resourcefulness, productivity, and destructiveness. As an aside, note that the feminist assumption of equality has led to claims that men have improperly monopolized the best positions in science and industry throughout the ages, and that women should be allowed to monopolize them today as some form of intergenerational justice. First off, leaving aside the injustice of group justice generally, intergenerational sexual justice seems preposterous on its face, given that men and women were not from separate tribes, as women had as many male ancestors as men did, and they benefited from the successes of, and inherited from, their own male ancestors, just as men did from theirs. In other words, a woman's father's advantages helped her, not some random unrelated man. But an even more extreme disconnect in the feminist approach is ignoring that these men in the past were almost all married and supported and were intimately connected with women, their wives. Even though most men would not be thrilled with the idea of women getting all the plum jobs today, most would probably accept it without too much complaint if those women married them and took care of them. But that is not part of the feminist plan. Instead, they think that the men should be cast out into the cold without opportunity, money, female companionship, or children, which is not turnabout as fair play, but is instead unmitigated cruelty motivated by hatred. Back to toxic masculinity. Even if one concedes that it exists and is somewhat pervasive, that does not mean that one must accept the feminist argument that its source is in child-rearing practices which teach boys to be especially masculine. Actually, it turns out that men who had been raised without a man in the household have higher rates of engaging in violent behavior and of being incarcerated, as well as higher rates of suicide, mental illness, and depression than men who had been raised with a father in the house, which is particularly interesting given that young women have been told for decades by feminists that children do not need fathers just as they do not need husbands. So, either women who raise children without men teach toxic masculinity to their sons more than men do, or the basic feminist assumption about toxic masculinity is wrong, which seems far more likely. One alternative explanation for at least some of the rise in the behavior described as evidence of toxic masculinity is that boys raised without fathers become broken young men who do not know how to engage in healthy social behaviors and whose motivational system is dysfunctional. And as a result, they often engage in random harmful and violent acts that become crime statistics. Another possible explanation is that there is rising anger due to rising inequality and diminished opportunities, defying long-held expectations. And those in control have so far succeeded in preventing that anger from coalescing as part of a viable revolutionary movement with broad appeal. So the anger is expressed through random acts of violence by disaffected males who historically would have become involved in revolutionary movements. In any event, it does appear that a growing number of men today are suffering from joblessness, depression, hopelessness, and despair. But this seems to be more from a combination of economic changes and greater division and mistrust between the sexes, which has been accompanied by an extremely harmful yet socially acceptable rise in misandry. The attempts by feminists to identify and address toxic masculinity appear to be more part of the cause than of the solution to this troubling trend.